If you're in the market for a muff, you've got quite a few options. And that's great if you have a particular style or an era or a set of features in mind. It can also be a little confusing, and maybe you're thinking, well, which one is the right one for me? So today we're going to do a quick run through of some of the Big Muff pedals you might be considering. We'll talk about how they came to be and find out what each one does best. Let's get to it. Here's what I've got for us to work with today. I've got a Big Muff. This is the modern version in the big metal enclosure. I've got 4 of the nano-sized reissues with the triangle, ram's head, Opamp, and Russian Big Muff. I've got a bass Big Muff in the XO-sized enclosure here. I've got a metal muff. And for big pedals, I've got the Germanium4 Big Muff, which has overdrive and distortion. I've got a deluxe bass Big Muff. We're going to get into that. And I've got this deluxe Russian Big Muff. Big fan of this one. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, but let me just say up front, I'm focusing on electro-harmonic stuff that you can buy today for like around $100 or less. And I know there's some amazing boutique clones. I know the vintage stuff has absolute magic inside. We're going to use what we have right here. But first off, I think we should do a little bit of background. So way back in the 1960s, the Maestro Fuzz Tone was the pedal to have if you wanted that sound that Led Zeppelin, the Kinks, the Ventures, and even the Beatles were starting to experiment with. So, of course, if you were a music instrument company, you wanted in on that action too. Guild had the Foxy Lady, and in 1967, they contracted Mike Matthews and Robert Meyer to build those pedals for them after the previous builder, Mosrite, went bankrupt. Michael worked at IBM at the time, Robert at Bell Labs, and they were just 2 guys that were really into building circuits and amplifiers and stuff like that. Things went really well. Michael founded Electro-Harmonix, initially building those Foxy Lady pedals, but wanting something of his own. One of the first products they made was the LPB1, the Linear Power Booster, a sort of a clean boost. And it was cheap, simple to make, and it got them off to a great start. With the success of that platform, they wanted to see what else could go in that enclosure, and they tried out a fuzz circuit, of course. Mike called it the Muff after the muffled fuzz sound it produced. Wanting to expand on that and add even more sustain, it got a larger enclosure with 3 knobs, known as, well, what else? The Big Muff. The first productized Big Muff is known, at least in hindsight, as the Triangle Big Muff because, compared with the others, it had its knobs arranged in a triangle. It was certainly a spiritual successor to the Foxy Lady, but with an accent on the sustain and a smoother response on the higher frequencies. Again, one of the fun things about Muff lore is that there's no single definitive benchmark 71 Muff. Each pedal they've managed to track down has its own unique flavor. But this is just the closest we're going to get in this video. Here's the Nano Triangle Muff. Hey, get ready to hear that riff a couple more times. It's just something quick and easy that I can bang out fairly consistently from pedal to pedal. I'm using that strat. I'm switching from the bridge to the neck and then back to the bridge, just trying to cover as much ground as possible. Anyway, it sounds like a Big Muff. It's got that trademark fuzzy sustain and the raw grit. Not much else to say really, so let's get into version 2 so we have something to compare it to. The Ram's Head Big Muff came about after a few tweaks and improvement, and it's called the Ram's Head because that's when they started putting that logo on the front, which I always assumed was a confused guy poking his head out from some bushes. Hmm. Anyway, here's the Ram's Head Big Muff. Now, I spent quite a bit of time going back and forth between these two here with different guitars and different settings. These two are the most similar of all the pedals we're going to look at today, but there is a difference. And when I play them back to back, I think you'll hear a little more of an aggressive feel from the Ram's Head. And then moving further up the neck, I just think the Ram's Head has a little bit of a thicker feel above the 12th fret. I'm really glad they made two early vintage pedals here. They didn't try to combine them into one because there is a difference. It's slight, and a much bigger influence on your sound is going to be the guitar you play, the pickups you use, the amps you're plugged into, your style of playing, all that stuff. But edge to the Ram's Head if you're looking for just a little bit more hair in there. Somewhere along the line, they started experimenting with using op amps, operational amplifiers, in Big Muff pedals, and that was likely a cost-saving measure. You can fit multiple amplifier circuits into a single op amp chip. They're cheaper, they're more consistent, and can lead to simpler overall circuit design. Let's take a listen to the Nano Opamp Big Muff. Now, all by itself, it sounds a little thin and there's not a lot of low end, but I'm going to use it for the solo part of the second demo jam. And when you hear how it fits into the mix, it might make a little bit more sense. This pedal also has a tone switch, so if you want just the raw fuzz without any tone stack getting in the way, you can flip that sucker to off. Despite a number of successful years, the company went bankrupt in 1982. Mike used some of the contacts he made in Russia in previous years to start the New Sensor Corporation, producing primarily vacuum tubes. After getting that up and running, he launched Sovtech, making amps and pedals, and that's where the next variant of the Big Muff popped up, known as the Red Army Overdrive. It eventually got renamed to simply the Big Muff. And to give it its own unique character, it came with Cyrillic text all over it. It is painted up in military green, and there were even rumors that it came from the metal of former Soviet tanks. That's not true, but I'm sure Mike didn't do much to stop those rumors. Those pedals are still obtainable at non-astronomical prices, but we're trying to keep it around $100 or less, so here is the Nano Russian Big Muff. In here, I hear a much more balanced distortion, and the clipping doesn't completely envelop the playing. It's not as hairy around the edges, but also not as buzzy and tight as the Opamp pedal that we heard before. This is probably my favorite all-around style of Big Muff, and it's also why I went out and bought the deluxe version of it. This adds a few features like a blend knob, a noise gate, 2 controls for the mids, and the Wicker feature. That feature shows up on another white exo-sized Big Muff, and that little switch lets you kick in some additional high-end filters to really let that high-end sizzle. Here's what that sounds like on the deluxe Russian Big Muff. So that takes us through the vintage Big Muffs from New York to Russia, but we're not done yet because in 2000, Mike returned to New York City and released the Big Muff. And aside from there being an LED and it being true bypass, there's nothing in here that isn't in any prior version. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's kind of a lessons learned kind of pedal. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It's just the next evolutionary step in the Big Muff story. Of course, the big box is kind of an electroharmonics thing. The circuit board inside just takes up a fraction of that space. So if size is a problem, there's also the little Big Muff as well as the nano-sized NYC Big Muff, both based on this circuit design. So if you wondered why there are so many versions of these new nano-sized pedals, it's because when it comes to a pedal with a legacy like the Big Muff, it's probably best to not try and cover all the bases with a single vintage pedal. Plus, it ensures that people like me will go out and buy all of them so we know we're not missing something. Well played, Electroharmonics. Well played. Within the Big Muff family, there's a few others to cover. Take this Germanium4. This uses 4 germanium transistors to power a combination overdrive distortion pedal. This one really deserves its own spotlight video one of these days, but the short version is that when they first started building pedals, they used silicon transistors instead of germanium, so this is kind of a what-if pedal. Here's a quick tour of what this can do. These bias knobs let you adjust the tonality of just how it reacts to your playing, and the distortion side has this volts knob, which lets you get some neat sputtering type of effects from the distortion. Then there's the metal muff. All the other pedals so far, if you had to borrow a friend's pedal board and they had a different type of muff than the one you normally use, it would be no big deal. You could adapt pretty easily. This one is the outlier. It's difficult to compare this because it just feels like it's born of different DNA. It's got a 3-band EQ, a noise gate, and a super heavy, thick distortion. I'm not really a metal guy, but I tried my best, so why don't you give it a listen? If that's your thing, there's also a deluxe metal muff that swaps out the noise gate for a boost function. Could come in handy. And then we get to the bass Big Muffs. Some of my favorite all-time bass playing comes from Robert Sledge of Ben Folds 5 fame. He used a Russian Big Muff to lay down something that just perfectly juxtaposed Ben Folds' percussive, across the keyboard piano playing. It's some of the best playing you'll ever hear. Go back and listen to those albums. Now, there was no specific bass muff when Ben Folds 5 was around, and it's anyone's guess as to whether the existence of one of those would have made any difference to Mr. Sledge. Today, there's this XO-sized bass Big Muff, also available in a Nano-sized pedal, but I really think the best value is in the deluxe model here. You get a foot switchable filter section, a noise gate, a direct out, and a blend knob. And that blend knob is super important on bass because fuzz has a way of killing bass dynamics. And that blend knob lets you keep the punch without losing the growl. So you're a musician contemplating a muff. Which one do you get? Well, if you're really into the vintage, loose around the edges, violin style sustain, definitely look into those earlier triangle and ram's head models and lean towards the ram's head if you like that extra bit of growl and rasp in there. If you want something that's a little more like a distortion pedal with some compression in there, the tightness of the Opamp muff definitely helps in the mix. For a fuzz that still lets your guitar ring through, the Russian Big Muff is a lot of people's favorites, myself included, and the modern NYC Muff is just a bit of everything. It's right in the middle. If you can't make up your mind, go with this one. But to be totally honest, in a game of muff roulette, I'd be lucky to make 3 for 5. And I only say that because I think I can pick out the Opamp and the Russian ones by now. That Germanium muff might be a solid all-around contender as well. And to be honest, I didn't spend too much time seeing what I could do with it. I mainly just wanted to focus on the new Nano pedals, but there's definitely lots of territory to be covered in that thing. And then there's the metal muff. Yeah, that one's definitely off doing its own thing. But really, this is pizza. And when the pizza is good, you shouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out which slice is the perfect one. You just got to let your heart guide you and enjoy whatever you pick because there's always room for seconds. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere. Hey, that sounds like a song. Everyone's got someone they immediately associate with the Big Muff. Maybe Billy Corgan, David Gilmour, John Frusciante, Robert Sledge. Ambitious players, and I think this pedal rewards you for being ambitious in your playing. It shines when you feed it those crazy bends and notes that just kind of rip out of nowhere. It rewards experimentation, makes you want to keep playing, and that, maybe more than anything else, it's what's going to push you into some fun places. Hey, I know this was a longer video than normal. I promise I'm not trying to turn these into docudramas, but we had a lot of ground to cover. Hopefully you got some answers to your questions. Maybe I ruffled some feathers, planted some seeds. Let's hear about it down in the comments down there, but also please make sure you're subscribed, make sure your guitar is tuned up, and I will catch you on the next one.